In this demo, I'm going to show you how to implement the iDataErrorInfo interface and use that to drive your validation. Starting point here is the ending point of the last demo. So we're going to first go and drag the cell phone property out to generate a new field that we can do data binding with. I'm going to drop into the XAML for that and modify the binding that was generated to get rid of these extra properties and just put one additional property, which is validates on data errors equals true. We saw validates on exceptions earlier. This is an alternative to that, using iDataErrorInfo to drive your validation instead of exceptions. You can certainly do both. In fact, there are times for a numeric input, for example, bound to an integer field, that if you put in something like ABC, it won't be able to convert it to even set the property. So validates on data errors won't have a chance to take effect, but validates on exceptions would show that there was a format exception thrown trying to set that property. In this case, we're dealing with a string property, so it's not applicable. Now we need to go implement iDataErrorInfo on our model object that we're binding to. So I'll drop into my customer and add the iDataErrorInfo interface and implement it using Visual Studio. Down at the bottom of my class, it added two members, a string called error and an indexer that says column name here, but you can think of this really as property name. The reason it generates it as column name is this dates back to .NET 1.0, and the main thing that implemented this interface was data sets. So column name was there to represent a column in a data table within a data set. But on an entity, it's really the property name that's going to be passed into the indexer, and it returns a string. So the idea here is that the error property is meant to represent an error for the object as a whole. For that, I'm just going to return string.empty. The indexer is what we're going to focus our effort on, and the idea is that this will be invoked by the binding when you say notify on data errors equals true. The binding will call this indexer for the property that is bound to whenever it goes and sets that property. So first it will set the property, then it will invoke the indexer, telling you what property has been set. So it's basically giving you an opportunity here to say, are you happy with the value that was set? You do have to first accept the value into the property. So you're going to have to let the set block be called, not throw an exception, write it into your member variable, so that down here in the indexer, you can then look at that value in the member variable and decide whether you like it or not. And if not, return an error string. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to return a method because I don't like putting a bunch of logic in a get block of a property. Then I'll go right below that and implement that method. And the nature of the method that you're going to have to implement is unfortunately generally a big switch case statement with a case for each property that you have validation rules you want to implement. That's one of the downsides of iDataErrorInfo. But because you're inside of the entity itself, it does give you the flexibility to do cross-property validation. For example, if you have some consistency rule between property A and property B, you can inspect both of those when property A is set or when property B is set and come up with an error based on that. In our case, we're just going to inspect for the cell phone property when it's set. We're going to use that same regular expression, see if it's a match, and return invalid phone format as an error string if it's not a match, or just string.empty if it's good. So basically, if you return null or string.empty, it means there's no validation error, but any non-empty string means a validation error. So by virtue of the fact that our entity that we're binding to now implements this interface, and our binding says that we do want to honor that interface, this binding will basically hook up to that interface and query for errors every time it goes to set the property that it's bound to. So with that, we can go ahead and run. Input an invalid value, tab out, and we can see the error indication there. Get it into a valid value, tab out, and the error goes away. And that's really all there is to iDataErrorInfo. Mostly focused on the indexer. Go decide what property is being set, invoke whatever rules are appropriate for that property, come up with an error string if there is one, and return it.